Yeah, I'll do that.
Oh yeah, no, and actually it's just now exactly 10 minutes.
Okay. Yes. That should be okay.
And no screen time problem.
Well, I'll just touch it. Let's see what happens when I touch it. Nothing. Okay. So I'll touch it every couple minutes. Okay. Cool.
Okay, are you sending out the link, Abdel, or?
I'll take care of that.
Okay, very good. Don't want to get out. So Abdel, we'll wait just a moment to make sure that. Okay, got Tanya in motion. Oops, we need to let. Can somebody let Megan? Can you let? Yeah, let me know when you got the link out. Okay, well, I think we will begin. Wow, gosh, since I've been away for a while, I'm Joel Brown. It is like fantastic to be back in this room, and even better to have the opportunity to introduce to you Abdel Holloway, who will be our PhD seminar today. But before we do so, we have a number kind of guests of honor. So I would like to draw attention to Dr. and Mrs. Holloway and Miss Salwa Holloway. And I believe somewhere in a box from London, we have Rashid Holloway, but he's in London, so he should be like beaming in somehow or whatnot. And throughout all of this, I knew them originally as simply the parents of Abdel. And then in that journey, it represents a PhD and the support that all three of you, and of course all four of you as a family have given Abdel has been extraordinary. And so it's fun to have started out as you were simply Abdel's folks. And now you're my friend. So thanks. It's really great to have you here.
We'll always be your friend.
Well, I know that, and I appreciate that. Also, would like to acknowledge the committee. So somewhere inside there in Maastricht University in the Netherlands is Katrina Stankova, a colleague of mine and a game theorist in the Department of Mathematics. We have Jerry Gona, who is from the Department of Mathematics and is somewhere in between time zones from San Diego prior to China and whatnot. Jerry, it's great to have you here. Thanks. Certainly somebody who knows the hallways of biological sciences and E&E very, very well. We have Professor Tanya Berger-Wolf from Computer Sciences, but is no stranger than to folks on the committee. And then, last but not least, we have Chris Whalen, who's now at the Moffitt Cancer Center along with me, and Dr. Hank Howe. And Hank and Chris, this is kind of like a reunion. Yeah, this is like kind of, yeah, sorry, Abdel, we'll get back to you. But this is like, wow. Yeah, we've done that once or twice. But today is a unique opportunity. Abdel is a unique person. I won't say how many years we've known each other. He came into my lab as an undergraduate, having taken a course from Moshe Wolf, who's sitting back there. So all of the family, who really kind of inspired his thinking in ecology and evolution. Sickle cell anemia, a disease that Abdel has had to deal with, work through his lifetime, along with his family, and precluded him from ever being a field biologist, which I think was your true love of wanting to be out there in the field. So that was not going to be possible. But Abdel discovered a number of things. One, he's incredibly smart, scary smart. I think the people in the lab will agree to that. Yeah, Alex is shaking his head. Yeah. They're all hoping he'll go, so suddenly they will seem smart. No, you guys are really smart. I'm sorry. The last thing you want to do is diss the people you're going to be up here shortly thereafter. Scary Smart works really, really hard, is phenomenally insightful, and I'll touch on those. But also, I would say, one of the most wonderful and team-playing human beings I have ever met. Yes, you can kind of go hide in the corner if you can. Abdel and Meg, the two of them have really, in my absence in the last couple of years, really have been the academic big sister and brother for the lab. I think the lab will agree with that, and Abdel has been one to really kind of step in. So what makes Abdel remarkable? Well, a couple things that worked out very well. I remember him in the population ecology class, right here in the pop ecology class. I'd get up there on the board and I would try to build some suspense as you're working through an eigenvalue, a community matrix or whatnot. And how do you make that exciting? How do you make that like a novel? And some of the students you can see furiously trying to copy things down in hopes that they will understand it later. Other students have already gone to their happy place. They're drawing Christmas trees and things like that, snowmen, it's in the winter. And there was Abdel. He would break into a chuckle. He would actually begin to laugh because he could see where the lecture was going. Yeah, you turn around to it, like, yeah. And you would actually smile and laugh. And that made me so happy. Here was somebody who could see where the proof was going before it even got there. It's like, wow, this guy's cool. And then in working in the lab, there were two aspects in his research. An intense interest in big ideas. And often you don't see the big ideas anymore. We see a lot of bricklaying and other sorts of things. He gobbled up and became expert in evolutionary game theory. Joe Opalou, myself, we were working on a project of infinite niche packing. We were getting infinitely bogged down. Tom Benson had begun the project, my game theory mentor. He'd been able to get this thing up to about 15 species. Abdel, in the course of a summer, managed to create a community, a co-evolved community, at least in the computer, of 1,024 species. He did not give them genera or species names. They were just 1 through 1,024. But that gives you a sense of his ability then to handle abstract ideas, important ideas, big ideas, and distill them into accomplishment. But there's more to it than that. In the sort of the spirit of his academic grandfather, Mike Rosenzweig, and academic great-grandfather, Robert MacArthur, they would love this talk, because it also includes picking up issues in biogeography. So it's not just then looking at small pieces on a board, it actually elevates it, as you will see in his work. He truly takes flight with hawk moths, hummingbirds, and sunbirds as well. So without further ado, I think I've used up a bunch of your seminar. Abdel, this is really a great honor and pleasure to hear your work.
Well, after all that, I feel bad about the joke that I'm about to give, which is, welcome to my talk. It's titled Competition Across the Evolutionary Scales. As you all suspect, this is a dissertation seminar, a PhD seminar, but whatever you want to call it. I like to call it I would very much like to move on with my life. Other side, I really feel bad about that. So, as a room primarily full of ecologists and evolutionary biologists, but people just interested in the natural world, we're all interested in life on Earth, right? It's this sort of strange thing, right? And we might have been introduced to it by a series like this, Life on Earth by David Attenborough. And three things we know as ecologists and evolutionary biologists about life on Earth is one, that it is incredibly abundant. There's a lot of stuff on Earth. There's just like a lot of living matter. It's a lot of that living matter is diverse, and so there's a lot of variation, but it's also pretty well organized together. Now, the abundance to me is a question of chemistry. It's the conversion of inorganic matter to organic matter, and I'm not really interested in that. I can do chemistry and sociology, but once you start getting to orgo, I'm like, no, stop out. But the questions about diversity and organization are to me about biology. And those are the things that I'm quite interested in. So if we look at life on Earth, it's hugely diverse. And what we the field of study we use to understand this diversity is evolution. The mathematical basis of evolution being population genetics. If we then take and try to understand the organization, the relationship between plants and animals and all the various things, we call this field ecology, and it uses population models to understand. Now, ecology and evolution aren't really separate. They exist in this feedback loop. And I think the best framework to understanding the interface between ecology and evolution is actually evolutionary game theory. So the question now is, what is evolutionary game theory? Well, first question is, what is game theory? I see game theory as the study of games like soccer. And a characteristic of games is that they have players, like the Arsenal team in the red and white. They use strategies, like passing at pace, to get the ball past defenders. And then they try to achieve an objective, which is to score a goal. And that results in a payoff, which in this case is the immediate euphoria of scoring a goal. But ultimately, the 3-1 score, which means they win and get 3 points in the league. So players using strategies to achieve an objective to result in a payoff. That to me is what defines a game. And evolutionary game theory is the application of game theory to the natural world. And it may seem strange, but nature actually does play games. Maybe not like these birds over here, where they're playing bridge or poker or whichever one, but nature does have a game structure to it. We have our individual players, for example, the predator and the prey, and they both use different strategies, what as biologists we would call adaptations, to achieve their objective. So in the case of the predator, it has these long, sharp talons, so it can grab lunch, while the prey has big ears, so it can listen out and avoid becoming lunch. So that's their objective, and then it results in a payoff, which is they get to make more of themselves, aka fitness. So through this evolutionary game, the species with the best fitness tend to reproduce, tend to survive, and tend to proliferate. And through evolutionary game theory, we can understand how an organism, represented by this dot up here, will change in strategy to achieve maximum fitness or evolutionary stability. We can understand how that species that now at maximum fitness will slowly decrease in fitness, reproduce until it is now 0, which is ecological stability. And then we can integrate the two in a co-evolutionary, co-diversification process to get an eco-evolutionary stability. So there's this interface between ecology and evolution, but that's not all. If we look at ecology, if we look at the universe is absolutely huge, right? If you think at the smaller scales, we have stuff like bacteria over here, an atom, even smaller, helium nucleus, all the way down to Planck length and quantum fog. If we go to larger scales, we are talking about maybe the Earth at this point, all the way up to galaxies, and then eventually the entire observable universe. And smack dab in the middle, right in the middle of all this universe, at the center of it, is a nightstand. So we can think about the scales at which each scientific field thinks about the universe, right? Physics encompasses everything from quantum foam all the way up to the universe. They have the largest scale, that's why they're so egotistical. Chemistry looks maybe at quantum stuff all the way up to macromolecules, but not too much higher. Biology, and by biology I mean medical science, and within the organism biology, looks from around macromolecules, proteins, stuff like that, up to the entire organism itself. Largest ones maybe blue whales and such. But ecology has the second largest reach, I think, of any scientific discipline, going all the way from the quantum effects of photosynthesis up to the entire biosphere. So it's not just that there's an evolutionary feedback, but there's an evolutionary feedback occurring at multiple scales, smaller to larger, maybe across temporal scales or organizational scales, and they're interfacing back with each other. A good way to think about it is to take an animal, let's say a canid, like a wolf. And you have a wolf, and wolves actually can be quite diverse. You can have some of them with different patterns, some of them with different colors. You can have one of them that's just a solid color. You can have one that's black, one that's white, one that's smaller, one that's really skinny. But a wolf has all this variation, but still has this singular form. If we zoom out from the wolf to the canid level, we see the potential diversity that occurs within this wolf. Within the canids, I'm sorry. So we can have canids like the coyote, black-backed jackal, or the simian jackal, or Ethiopian wolf, which all are broadly similar but have these slight differences. We have stuff like the fox, red fox, which is quite different. Arctic fox, maybe a bit more different. We have the maned wolf. Now we're starting to get into a bit more diversity. We can have really radically different things like the African wild dog, bag-eared fox, the phoenix fox. We can have things that don't even look like canids, like the raccoon dog and bush dog. And through domestication, we can even see greater evolutionary potential with the really large dogs, the massive dogs, the hairy dogs, hairy and massive dogs, speedsters. We can see things that is there really an ecological niche for that? Things for which there definitely is no ecological niche, and things which will never ever evolve. But we can see this form of canids. But no matter how much we stretch a canid, it will never become one thing. And that thing is it will never become a cat, because it does not have these rotary cuffs that allow it to rotate its arms to grab prey. So the canids and the cats will be entirely different. And from that, from a wolf, you cannot get a primate, a bat, a whale, and sorry, Dr. Brown, you will never be able to get a squirrel dog. So through that, we see, to me, there are three fundamental scales of ecology and evolution. There are interactions between individuals, between wolves of different kinds. There are interactions between populations, species, between the wolf and the African wild dog. And there are interactions between clades, between the wolf and the leopard. So with that framework in mind, I theoretically explored competition. Why? Because competition is the fundamental, well, some people might think the fundamental ecological interaction. When competition occurs between mates, resources, space, whatever, there's a lot of competition going on in this world, in the natural world. How did I look at it? Well, I did it mathematically, in which I used the G-function framework, which embeds an evolutionary game within ecological dynamics. And I used previously gathered data. Basically, I got to reap the rewards of other people's hard work. So what did I look at? Well, as I said, I analyzed the three scales, and this is the sort of outline that fell out of my dissertation. Firstly, at the individual level, looking at specialization under competitive dynamics and the population dynamics of cooperative species. That's okay, that may not be competition, but I will show you how it actually fits into the theme of that. And through this, what we have shown, what I hope to show is how individual interactions can then go on to shape the entire structure of the population. At the population level, we sort of flipped that. Instead of looking at lower processes building up to higher processes, we looked at how these higher level aggregations, these communities, can then affect lower processes like population evolution. And so we look at the dynamics in undersaturated communities. And then at the clade level, I explore a sort of, perhaps not novel, but a different form of competition in which clades interact with each other to mutually suppress each other's diversity and fitness. So let's start out between individuals. And let's start out with chapter 1. Imagine you have a resource. Maybe it's a resource like popcorn. And this popcorn could be varied. Like you have butter, you have caramel, you have cheddar, but we're not going to really concern ourselves with Jarrett's. Instead, we're going to look at the real popcorn company, the Toronto Popcorn Company, which has, this is real. These are these flavors. Banana, popcorn if you want. You have pina colada, you have black cherry, cookies and cream, s'mores. They're all really delicious. Like, there are so many people in this lab that can attest to that. So, salt and vinegar, spicy bacon cheddar. So we have this diversity of resources. The question becomes, what do you choose to eat? If you walk into the store, what would you choose to eat? And specifically, what would you choose to eat under the effects of competition? Basically, if you walk into the store and you want flavored popcorn and your grubby little sister, she's there trying to take that popcorn because she likes it just as much as you do, what would you do? Well, there are a couple of hypotheses. First, it could be that as competition increases, the overall population diversifies in its resource use. And to use an example, when we were younger, we actually would get Garrett's popcorn. We would have the butter, cheddar, caramel combo. And my sister, my brother, and I would all like butter, cheddar, caramel in that order. But my brother, he was the oldest, he would bully his way. I get the butter. Then I would tag team with my brother to get the cheddars, leaving my sister only with the caramel. So I guess when she comes and says, I want that popcorn for Toronto Popcorn Company, because I guess that's a bit of a retribution, right? A ritual revenge. But basically, because of the competition, even we couldn't all have butter, so we all diversified in our use. And this is one idea, the competitive diversification hypothesis. Another hypothesis is that at low levels of competition, you'll see this increase, but then as competition gets really, really high, it actually, you see a return to this specialized form where everybody's taking the same food. So we want to explore this theoretically, and what we did is we created a model, and we imagine like a resource curve, something like this. And it varies, let's imagine it's popcorn, and it varies in all these different flavors, right? Cinnamon toast, cheddar, butter, strawberry milkshake, that's a real flavor, and it is really good. Peri Terry, if you want Nando's as popcorn, that's always available. And we can imagine that each of us has our own preference, our own want for this popcorn, right? Because our own utilization curves. So for example, this blue one, that might be me because I really like strawberry milkshake, but I can sort of eat a little bit of everything. We have this purple one, which is really specialized on the salt and vinegar. That might be you, Dr. Brown. We have this one in red. They probably just like whatever's there, eating cheddar and butter, and maybe they're Chicago. So we can all create our own individual utilization curves of what we prefer and what we want to eat. But in a limited capacity, and we can sum up all these utilization curves to get a cumulative or maybe total utilization curve for the entire community, so for all of us. But the key thing is, we go back, if there are limited resources, if there's a limited amount of popcorn, not enough to go around, then we have to go back to kindergarten and say, sharing is caring. And so where we saw, the green could eat all this resource here, all the cheddar and butter, but because it had faced competition, it had to reduce what it can get, right? So then you're an individual, you're facing this community, you're all competing. What do you decide to eat? What do you choose to eat? So we analyze this model, and we start out with some parameter, doesn't matter, it's just a parameter. And most importantly, what we did is we varied the competition level by varying the population size. Then we varied another parameter, it doesn't matter what the parameter is, it's just whatever. And then at each combination of competition level and this penalties to specialization, this parameter number 2, we looked at whether the population would eventually become very specialized or very generalized. And what we got was this figure, a figure so funky and colorful that George Clinton would be proud. So in this figure, what you want to see is that cool colors represent generalization, warm colors represent specialization. And so at these lower levels here, we can see that we go from the blue up to the purple, so we're becoming more generalized, and then we go back down, becoming more specialized. So this is like the second hypothesis. Sometimes here we're going from orange to yellow to green, so we're just solid straight increased generalization. So we're becoming more and more generalized, like the first hypothesis. But other times, what we see here that's novel is we will move from like an orange down into a red and back up to an orange. So at these lower levels, we see an increase in specialization before recovery back to generalization, which George Clinton thinks is really funky. And we think this has to do, going back to the caring to sharing idea, with competition. Specialization seems to offer a competitive advantage where if you can get the butter popcorn before your older brother gets to it first, you may be able to enjoy that. So in some cases, it actually might be better to be more specialized as an individual. And we see that evolution of the population towards that greater specialization. And we see a figure that looks like this, so this is our hypothesis in the black, where we increase competition, we increase in specialization before going back again. So on to the second chapter. Competition is cool and all, but let's be like M. Night Shyamalan and add a twist. So with competition, most individuals prefer to be by themselves. If you ask this leopard here, are you happy right now? It's like, yes, I'm totally happy. I have all the space, I have all the resources, nobody's bothering me. And then as you slowly add more and more leopards, it's like, okay, this is becoming less fun. This is too much. And it eventually becomes very angry. Right? So that's how competition works. As you add more and more individuals, fitness goes down. Well, but some species, like this wolf, actually hate being by themselves, and so this one is alone. It's sad. It's crying. It wants to be with a friend, and a friend comes along, and okay, I'm slightly happy, and now it's getting happier and happier, and now, hey, there's a nice size, and oh, look, this is great. It's a great cat size, but like competition, you might also see a decrease where soon it starts to become a bit too much. And then at some point it gets annoyed because, hey, this last wolf showed up and this wolf is Brett. Brett, he's a party wolf. He wants to go and get tequila and all of that stuff. And he's just annoying. And then there's more and more and more individuals until it's upset. So at this point, it might be in everybody's best interest to split the pack into two. And now everybody's happy. This wolf, the original wolf, was happy because Brett's now in that other group. He doesn't have to deal. They don't have to deal. But they're not as happy as they were before because groups still face competition with each other. It might not be as strong as within group competition, but there's still competition between groups going on. And this is also unstable because if there's a group that's quote unquote happy, then other wolves may decide to join, like Chad. And Chad, the party wolf, is like, hey bro, I'm ready for the shots now. Where's the tequila at, man? And so it's not because wolves like to party and they're like Jagged Edge asking where the party at, but instead through fitness. What we're measuring is not happiness, but fitness. So individuals will aggregate with each other through these fitness outcomes. And here we have a very small group. And we can measure both its fitness at this top level here and its satisfaction with the group size. And if it's positive, it's mostly satisfied, and it would in fact welcome other individuals to join the group because other individuals will increase fitness. Because individuals are trying to maximize their fitness. So the group grows, it has more fitness, it's reproducing, the group gets larger. Eventually, it gets to this optimal size here. And as individuals, this is the perfect size. Let's stop here. Oh no, we're still producing babies. So what happens, the group grows until now everybody's unsatisfied. Back again. And now it's at a fitness equilibrium, but it's no longer at a behavioral equilibrium. And so once again, the optimal solution might be to split into two. Now they're at the maximum of their fitness, but thanks once again to competition, that maximum of fitness is no longer positive, that's negative. So through this model, we have shown 3 specific outcomes and 1 general outcome. And this depends upon the level of competition. First, after splitting, these 2 groups may just go extinct completely. Then, and that's if competition is very strong. If competition is moderately strong, then maybe they go to unstable equilibrium. What does that mean? Nothing, just roll with punching. And then if competition is weak, then you might see a sort of continuous turnover in which you see this growth and splitting dynamic. Each of these solid bars represents splitting. But what happens is these larger groups, they're the ones that persist. These purple, green, and oranges, they're the ones that persist. While the smaller groups, these blues, they're the ones that continually go extinct. So this is constant turnover. And the importance of this is that what we show generally is that cooperative species don't seem to have stable population dynamics. They're pretty much guaranteed unstable population dynamics. So that was, because of cooperation in this competition game, we can see that it's affecting population structure where there's no stable population dynamic, unlike with competition. So if we look between species, we can ask about predator-prey dynamics. I understand that's a bit of a segue, but just trust me, just roll with the punches for now. There are 2 contrasting views of predator-prey dynamics. The first view is that predator-prey relationships are an endless red-queen dynamic, where as a prey evolves away from a predator, evolves to evade a predator, the predator evolves back to the prey. So basically there's this constant chase back and forth, and we can see that here as this prey evolves in its strategy, trying to evade the predator tries to evolve the same strategy, and we get this looping back and forth. And we don't just get oscillation, it's oscillatory dynamics. We can also get these more chaotic dynamics, more like the Moritz system. In this view, the predator-prey communities are very depauperate. There's only one predator, there's only one prey in that system. It's not very a rich system. The other idea is that these predator-prey relationships are prone to diversification. They're likely to lead to speciation, to the creation of new forms and new varieties as the coevolution process takes over. And we see that through this diversification process. Here we have a prey on the maximum of its adaptive landscape, but as soon as the predator comes, it creates a unstable minimum. The prey splits into 2, which causes the predator split into 2. And now we have 2 predator, 2 prey, and then you're going to see the prey diversify, and now we have 2 predator, 3 prey, and there's this constant co-evolutionary, co-diversification process going on. And this is typical of this, and so in this view, predator-prey communities are very rich, very diverse. So instead of just the leopard and the impala, what we also have is the cheetah and the Thompson's gazelle, and then the lion and the kudu. So these predator-prey systems are rich. So the question becomes, are these predator-prey communities, and generally ecological communities, what do they look like? Are they primarily depauperate without many species and largely oscillating and changing and evolving, represented by this blue dot? Are they primarily rich and equilibrial, represented by this red dot? Or is this somehow linked between the two? Do these two dots exist on this sort of continuum, so to speak? And what we show is that they are linked, and we show it through this figure, a meaningless figure, but basically, I mean, I don't know how many people want to go through eigenvalues and saturation and all of that, second derivative. Okay, I'll make sure that as committee members we'll go through that. So, but basically what we're showing here is that when communities are saturated, when they're at their maximum capacity for species number, they're always stable. And only when they're unsaturated do we see unstable dynamics. So it seems that these two things are coupled. We can in fact see that diversification video that I showed you can actually show these unsaturated equilibrial, non-equilibrial processes if it's very unsaturated. And so we can think of the red queen as a transient dynamic until you get to an ESS fully rich community. And then now for the last two chapters, looking at interactions between clades. So to start this off, let's talk maybe a bit about evolutionary convergence. It's the idea that species in similar habitats experience similar ecological conditions, and therefore will adapt to look the same, right? So if we have these two species, or clades or whichever, the purple and the green, because they're experiencing similar habitats, they occupy similar ranges, and therefore they'll have similar form, like this black-footed ferret over here, which only exists in North America, this Siberian polecat or steppe polecat, which exists in Eurasia. And we can see actually they're quite similar, convergent. Now you might say, okay, they're both Mustela, they're both part of the same genus, so of course you might see convergence. But convergence just doesn't happen at the species level, it also happens at family level. So I'm going to offer a picture. There are two nectarverse birds. One is a hummingbird, and one is a sunbird. I would like you guys to raise your hand if you think you know which is which. Dr. Whalen, you don't get a chance. I think that would just be cheating. So it's a 50-50 or more. So if you want to raise your hand. Louis? Yes. Okay. So yeah, so maybe it wasn't all that hard, but we can see that the hummingbirds and sunbirds are very similar. They are converging from, not only are they birds, they're very small birds. They both have that long bill, and that long bill is for them to reach into the flower and grab and obtain nectar. And so hummingbirds and sunbirds represent a sort of family level convergence, right? And convergence is great, but adaptations do matter. Better adaptations can lead to expansion of the niche space and the ability to enter into a greater range of environmental variables. So this purple clade now has a better adaptation that allows it to not just exist where the green clade is, but into higher, greater ranges. And we can see this with the eponymous mice of Europe and the Peromyscus mice of North America. The Peromyscus mice of North America have an adaptation that allows for more efficient worker. And because of that, in colder, higher elevations and more arid climates, they're able to survive better. And so because of that better torpor, the Peromyscus has expanded its biogeography. Now, hummingbirds and sunbirds also experience the same thing. If you look at this hummingbird, it's feeding very efficiently from the flower because it's able to hover. So I'll It's really quite phenomenal how well it's able to hover in front of flowers. Let's take a look at the sunbird. And here's a sunbird, and it's trying to hover in the flower, but it's really not. I mean, it's really trying its hardest. It really wants to, but it just doesn't have the adaptations to. An interesting thing is if we go back, it's a bit hard to see, but if you look at the beak of the sunbird is actually more curved than the beak of the hummingbird. And that's because sunbirds have to perch in order to feed. So that curved beak allows them to reach into a flower, unlike a hummingbird, which can just go straight into the flower. And because of that hovering adaptation, hummingbirds, represented by blue, extend as a clade into farther regions than sunbirds, represented by the green. So hummingbirds go all the way down to Tierra del Fuego and southern Chile, and all the way north to Alaska. And of course, they have a bit of an advantage. Africa doesn't go that low. Australia doesn't go that low. But then, even if you think about it, sunbirds could go all the way to Australia, but don't. And on top of that, sunbirds, even though they have this expansive space up north, all of Europe, all of Russia, and northern Asia, they only reach as far as the sort of Syria-Lebanon border, the Himalayas, maybe parts of China. They don't extend as far as hummingbirds. And another thing to point out is it's not they're just not extending as far, they're also not as species rich. The hummingbirds here show a very deep color, a deep purple, have 50 or so species. The sunbirds here, which show a very deep green, that's only 25 species. And we can also track this with regard to elevation, where once again, deeper colors represent proportionally more species. So both hummingbirds and sunbirds extend into about 5 kilometers high in elevation as a clade, but hummingbirds maintain their species richness at higher elevations, as you can see by the difference in color between 2 and 4 kilometers between hummingbirds and sunbirds. So the adaptations of these convergent nectarivorous birds really affect the environment and the climates they're able to extend into. So adaptations matter for biogeography. But even so, hummingbirds and sunbirds, they're mostly similar nectarivores. They're both birds, essentially. And they never meet. What happens when these adaptations are actually radically different? It's not just hovering, but it's fundamental adaptations, which allows the still convergent forms to occupy different environments. And what happens when these different forms meet up? So I'd like to show you another picture of a hummingbird. Here's a hummingbird, and as you can see, it's extremely specialized to its environment of nectar feeding. It has no bill. It decided to get rid of the bill. It has no legs. It decided to get rid of the legs. It just perches on its feathers. And it's just absolutely extremely specialized. I guess, well, it's a joke. This is a joke. I don't know how to say it. Yeah, this is not a hummingbird. This is a moth. It's a moth like the ones that fly around your lamp at night, just keep knocking into glass and stuff like that. But you can see that even this moth, this insect, this radically different form from a bird, has converged to nectar feeding and looks a lot like a hummingbird. And we can see, people are talking about it, but we can also see how it's hovering, right? So you can see that it's actually hovering quite well, almost like a hummingbird. And in the background, there are a lot of people confused about whether it was a moth or a hummingbird. And these are things that not just confuse ordinary people, but even seasoned naturalists. there are seasoned naturalists who will go and see this hawk moth fly by, go to the flowers, and they'll think, is that a hummingbird? So they are remarkably similar, but they are also radically different. Hummingbirds are endothermic. They're able to generate heat from within their body. Hawk moths are ectothermic. They rely on outside heat in order to warm themselves up and begin movement and physiological processes. Hummingbirds have a respiratory system that allows them to concentrate the oxygen from the air and really grab oxygen. Hawk moths have to rely on diffusion and can't capture oxygen as well as birds. Hummingbirds are diurnal. They come out during the day, while hawk moths come out at night or at dawn, dusk, these twilight hours. And hummingbirds have a non-larval stage, while hawk moths have a larval stage as caterpillars, in which they're not only susceptible to parasites, but they're also herbivorous, sometimes eating the plant species that they go on to then flower. So they're absolutely convergent in terms of nectar feeding, but in everything else, they seem quite different. So if we plot hummingbirds, if we plot, say, the species richness of hummingbirds, we can see a clear bias in where they show up. We see here, of course, things that are southern, more tropical will have higher species richness, but also things that are western. The hummingbirds seem to have higher species richness in western states. And we can see 13 different species exist in Arizona, 7 different species in California, but there's only one species of hummingbird west of the Rockies. That is the ruby-throated hummingbird, at least within the United States and Canada. So if you ask a hummingbird, what are you listening to? It's probably listening to the funky sounds of Maverick from Oxnard, California. Now we can plot the biogeography of hawk moths. And what we see is the same southern pattern. What we see across the east-west axis, it is flipped. Illinois, the land of corn and soybeans, has 42 species of hawk moth. While California, this huge state with varied geography, the chaparral, the mountains, the deserts, the redwoods, all of that, only has 30 species of hawk moth. Maine, which is half the size of Washington State, they're on the same latitude, but Maine is half the size, has 34 species of hawk moth, nearly twice as much as Washington State. So hawk moths are east biased, and if you ask what they're listening to, they're probably listening to the smooth sounds of Jenga rock. So through climate analysis, what we have shown is that hummingbirds prefer these cool summer night areas, high elevation areas, and areas with cool season flowering. They like Los Angeles. If you ask a hummingbird where it's going to retire, it's going to retire to Los Angeles. Hawk moths, on the other hand, prefer these warm season nights. They like low elevation areas and warm season flowering. It's going to retire to Palm Beach, Florida, maybe go clubbing and something like that. So, 2 convergent forms with radically different adaptations. Showing this partitioning, could this represent a higher form of competition? And it may sound a bit strange, but the idea behind that is the presence of each clade. Remember, both of them are going for the nectar resources. And the presence of each of them suppresses the diversity of the other based upon their comparative advantage. Hawk moths, they're not able to take in oxygen as much, so they need those low elevation areas, or else they're going to be less fit. They're going to need these warm summer nights because they're ectothermic, and they come out at night. They need a lot of warmth. While hummingbirds have their advantages in these high elevation areas, warm summer nights, cool season flowering. And this is not necessarily new. This is something that even Cruden et al. Came up with in 1976, where he showed that as you scale across mountains in Mexico, you actually see a drop-off around 5,000 feet of hawk moth pollinated flowers and a replacement with hummingbird pollinated flowers. And he also sort of came up with this idea of each clade is mutually suppressing the other. So if we think about this higher form of competition, we can take the Brown and Davidson criteria from 1997 for intertaxonomic competition and just simply elevate that to higher scales. And these three criteria were, do they show niche overlap? Is there geographical partitioning? And can exclusion experiments show that without one, the other has higher fitness or higher population size? So do they show niche overlap? Actually, yes, they do. They like these tubular flowers with high sugar content. Is there geographical partitioning? Yes. One exists primarily on the east, or shows its species richness highest on the east, the hawk moths, while hummingbirds show species richness on the west. We don't have exclusion experiments because unfortunately we can't wall off Texas and isolate it from the rest of the country. But I think we would have to see. I mean, I'm not putting it off to the side, but right now I don't think SF has that much fun. So this is a potentially higher form of competition that does not operate like individual competition or population-based competition. When a lot of ecologists seem to think, or I don't want to say a lot of ecologists, but some ecologists seem to think of the processes occurring at the individual level, aggregating to the population level, aggregating to the clade level. So there's this thought that population fitness is just the aggregation of population competition is just the aggregation of individual competition. And so macro competition, this clade level competition, must be just an aggregation of population competition and individual competition. But we're not quite making that statement. We're not saying that they suppress each other's as individuals, their fitness or their population size. They're suppressing the diversity, the species richness. And so it operates on a fundamentally different way. Through the suppression of the speciation process, it's not causing necessarily extinction between the two. And so macro competition has its own dynamics. And going forward, I think this may be the way that as ecologists and evolutionary biologists, we should think about competition. We usually talk about interspecific, intraspecific. I think there are different types, but they are not different scales. And each scale is radically different and must be observed as its own scale. With individuals are not able to change. They may show some plasticity, but they do not evolve within a lifetime. Populations evolve, and we saw the crazy evolutions that can happen when we looked at chapter 3. But populations do not undergo the speciation process. Clades will enrich themselves through the speciation process, which is entirely different than anything that happens at the individual and population level. So that's my main takeaway, but I have a second takeaway. And I want to go back to this figure where we have the scale of each scientific field. And once again, physics, it has the widest, but ecology comes second. I think we can increase the scale of ecology, not just so we're thinking about the biosphere level, but we're thinking at larger levels as ecology between stars, planets, and maybe even galaxies. And that may sound crazy, but back in 1978, there was this economist, a Nobel Prize winning economist, who wrote as a board academic the theory of interstellar trade. Well, I propose that sometime in the 2000s, I, as a board individual professor, will write a paper called The Theory of Interstellar Dispersal, and create this new field called galactic ecology. And with that, I would like to say thank you. I guess this is the John Donne portion of the lecture where you say no man is an island unto himself. And so I'd like to thank my committee members, Dr. Brown, my advisor. I think only with you could I have been a successful PhD, and I must really thank you. I must thank all the rest of my committee, Dr. Sankova, if you're watching, thank you. Dr. Whalen, Dr. Howe, Dr. Bona, Dr. Berger-Wolf, you've all given me valuable insights. I would like to thank my collaborators like Gordon McNichol, who didn't work on these projects per se, but I've worked with, Meg Malone, with whom I've been working on chapter 2 with, and a lot of other different projects. Nick Crouch and Professor Can Sıkırcıoğlu from Turkey. He was a collaborator on chapter 4. I'd like to thank my funding sources, UIC and NSF, and just generally all around good people, the Brown Lab members, of which, I mean, that's one hell of a list. But all of you have been given valuable insight, and I must thank you all. The Howe Lab members, once again, you have also been there and given me great insight. People like Luis, thank you. Marie Kahn, who was at the grad college here. Without her, I don't think I would have gotten the NSF fellowship, and I don't think I would have been a successful candidate without that, so she was really instrumental. And then last, but definitely not least, I would like to thank my family, my dad, my mom, my brother, if you're out there watching, and my sister. I love all of you, and thank you for all the support that you've given me. Thank you.
Well, we have some time for some questions. I would ask the committee to refrain from asking questions. We'll have plenty of time shortly.
So I like the approach of different spatial scales you took, and the approaches and how, you went from smaller scale with the individual competition all the way up to with the clades, etc., on much larger global scales. What about time? So do you think there's an element there that would affect those different levels on the temporal scale as well as just the spatial one?
I think there's a temporal component. I think a lot of ecology, or this eco-evolutionary dynamics, it's happening and it's becoming more and more. Ecology and evolution are becoming more united because there's this understanding that evolution can happen on the same temporal scales as ecology and therefore affect the ecological dynamics. So you have effects like microevolution that can occur on these small scale dynamics. But when you go to the higher level of the clade, with the speciation process, that takes a much longer time and does not occur on these population or quote-unquote ecological dynamics. So I do think temporal scales actually, there's a component to that as well. I sort of glossed over it, but I think it's definitely part of it. Dr. Wise?
Beautiful talk, wonderful talk. I guess the equations there along the way. One thing you did very skillfully, maybe you'll do this fancy later in the committee. You seem to avoid the whole issue of sympatric versus allopatric speciation in your discussion of speciation in your earlier models because of prey interaction and clay speciations. Is it hidden somewhere in your equations that you not put there?
I view these as the question of allopatric versus sympatric was not something that came up. That does not happen in the equations. I guess it offers an interesting twist to example, if we, let me see if I can go all back to so when we look at hummingbirds, one might say that actually hummingbird species richness is higher in the mountains because of allopatric speciation. You have a lot more diversity. You have segregation between the individuals of different populations, and therefore of course you're going to see higher species richness because they're just more isolated. And we don't, within the G function framework, we don't really think about whether it's allopatric, whether it's sympatric. We just know speciation happens. But it does, but there's also the idea of competitive speciation between individuals as elucidated by Rosenzweig, where you have two individuals existing on the same resource, and then therefore the mean resource suffers fitness, and that's how you get this sort of like speciation process.
So your models really are, and it's not criticism of your models, but they are implicitly modeling of sympatric species.
Yes. There's no real reproductive isolation.
I think the wolf example you had in that second chapter is really interesting, specifically because wolves, can often come into conflict with people. And as you sort of illustrated in this work, you kind of see that sort of constant turnover happening in group size and things like that, certain groups going extinct. Armed with that sort of knowledge, is there any sort of like bits that you can glean that could actually like sort of help the management sort of a species like that?
So actually that's something that Meg and I were discussing and had for maybe not wolf-human conflict, but for the conservation of the species. We think that larger reserves are more ideal for these cooperative species because one, they're constantly going extinct, right? So their per square kilometer, you're going to have on average, fewer individuals. One of the things that actually, even though we show a lot of unstable dynamics, one thing that can partially stabilize these dynamics is the fusion process, where smaller groups, if these smaller groups were able to come together and join up, it would be a more stable population. And for that reason, having a large area with a large number of groups who are able to interact, so a non-fragmented space that allows these individuals to come together would be much more stable. So yeah, Meg and I we came up and think that best conservation approach for these large social species is to have large areas, large contiguous habitats. Alexis?
Hey, great talk, by the way. Regarding intergalactic so life on Earth has over time become increasingly organized, even though the more general laws of basic entropy. Do you think that as you expand your research to larger systems, do you think that it's possible to make predictions about life outside of Earth based on interaction with life?
Yeah, so I think that life on other planets will look very similar to life on our planets, and maybe not in terms of like the nitty-gritty. I don't want to make a comment on whether there's going to be DNA-based life, proteins, and all of that. But if we think about it, you have a organism, right? And an organism that's photosynthetic. It captures energy from light and creates and grows through that process, right? Now imagine that organism can make wood or a wood-like structure. Then actually with Gord's research, we see this process in which there's this competitive game now, where once you create wood or some similar structure, you go to the organism becomes taller and taller, and now there's this race. And now all of a sudden you go from moss to tree. And so I don't think we're going to see trees in the sense that what we see here in the specific sense. But tree-like forms, I think, will be common throughout the universe, especially if you have an organism that is photosynthetic. I think the evolutionary advantage of wood structures would evolve. So I think that's something that will replicate across worlds. And so I do think there is a sort of predicting, we can, through these mathematical equations, through understanding life on Earth, we can predict how life on other worlds may look like. And I think it might actually be quite similar to life over here.
Michelle, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.